Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I am glad to say that we have made it through the Omer, and there is a lot to be said about that. And I am also glad to say that we pretty much are in the golden calf season now. And I'll illustrate that for you, but I wanted to recap some things from last week that you're going to find important in the information that we need to work with um, when it comes to the circumstances of today's message. But just to give you a taste of what we're up against today, I want to show you something. So, in all that we've discussed about getting small and um, any of the other important pieces of information uh, concerning elevation and I guess maybe the vastness of your power and authority and consciousness in the scheme of a vaster universe, okay? Where we get into Psalm 8 and things are under our feet, and yet we are a little lower than, depending on version, angels, Elohim, etc., right? Okay, so last week we discussed some things about uh, our position in this realm. But I'm going to jump over to James chapter 4 for a minute. And I want to see if maybe we can dive into information a little bit more. So, a couple things that I want to do. So, let's start in James chapter 1, actually, because James chapter 1 actually initiates some interesting information. And truth be told, I feel like a lack of understanding is present in James to begin with. So let's jump over here for a minute to James, I'll say 1:3. Okay. So it says, be assured that the testing of your faith through experience produces endurance, leading to spiritual maturity and inner peace. Now, before we go any further, let's talk a minute about all this. Okay, actually, let's go down to verse 1 and dial in something real quick. Okay. James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 Hebrew tribes scattered abroad among the Gentiles in the dispersion, greetings, rejoice. Okay. Let me tell you one of the most dangerous things, in my opinion, that is present in Christianity is a belief that the church has replaced Israel. Okay? So there's one of two things that you would have to do. Let's look at this again. To the 12 Hebrew tribes scattered abroad among the Gentiles in the dispersion, greetings, rejoice. In Christianity, there is a belief that the church has replaced Israel. Unless you are Reform and some Calvinists, but even then, there's still a little bit of replacement theology, right? In the quote unquote fulfillment of the law in Jesus Christ. But let's say that we just leave that alone for a minute, because any replacement of any of the Old Testament, and I apologize for using that word for those of you that find it offensive, any replacement of anything in the Tanakh is replacement theology. So if Christ replaced the law, if the church replaced Israel, if there is any replacement of any sort, it's replacement theology and is anti-Semitic in nature. And I will propose anti-Israel in nature, and I will propose anti-Christ in nature. Now, why? Because the moment that we start to dismiss any of God's promises as moot because of some other thing where he quote unquote changed his mind, like in dispensationalism or in covenantal theology, we are dealing with somebody who does not honor the covenantal promise made to a Jew by the intensification of all power in the universe stuffed into a God we can understand named Yahweh. So short version of this is if you do anything to try to tweak that, you are being anti-Semitic. And I will take a hard stance on that because I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the foundation of Christianity, which was the Council of Nicaea and the Nicene Creed, is anti-Semitic in nature, in intent, in purpose. I have no interest in I have no interest in worrying about the doctrinal discussions and debates that happen during the Trinitarian discussions at Council of Nicaea. I have an interest in the fact that Constantine congratulated them on separating themselves from the Jewish practices, which consequently are commanded to you in your Bible, that 66 compendium book you have, that for some reason the first, I believe, 47 books just don't apply to you, and you don't understand them, and they're probably more for Jews, and they're more of a historical suggestion than anything else. Sorry, that's not how this works. And I'm about to prove it to you with James. In fact, what I'm going to do with James is I'm going to prove the anti-Semitic conspiracy of removing a Hebrew New Testament. Okay? This is going to become important when we start to get into the discussion we're going to get into today, which is going to be a very complex and difficult discussion to hear and to apply. Okay? All right, so here we go. James is writing to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Who are the 12 tribes scattered abroad? Is that the church? Nope. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that you have to be one of the 12 tribes to read, apply, or use the book of James. Okay? I get that it mentions Jesus Christ, but that doesn't entitle the church to this letter. Now, what's important about this is that James is addressing people who supposedly don't exist anymore. When he says 12 tribes scattered abroad, you have no idea what he's actually saying. He's writing this entire letter in faith that it will reach the lost tribes of Israel. Because truth be told is that when the split occurred between the northern and southern kingdom, the northern kingdom being ran by the dominant faction of Ephraim, ran by Jeroboam, and the southern kingdom ran by Rehoboam, which included Judah, Benjamin, because Benjamin was actually like this little oval space in between this huge triangle space of Judah. And so it was just absorbed right into the southern kingdom. And when I say half the tribe of Levi, let me explain what I mean. Jeroboam kicked all the Levite priests out who were loyal to the temple. They were the priests that were present in the cities of refuge in the north, and also some of the Levite cities that were kind of like provided for them to dwell in when they were not actually working in the temple. Okay, so not necessarily a full half of the tribe of Levi. Could have been more, could have been less. But basically, those who said they were still loyal to God and to the temple went to Jerusalem and fled the northern kingdom. Anybody else had to disavow themselves from the temple and therefore still be a Levitical priest in the northern kingdom, but serve in Shechem at the golden calf in Shechem or the golden calf in Dan. Okay? Now that's going to become important here in a minute, but the point being is that when the Assyrian army came and ransacked the northern kingdom, Judah, Benjamin, and a majority of the tribe of Levi who were loyal still to the temple were not taken. Now, James, being a Jew, right, means he was the tribe of Judah, which was the predominant faction of the southern tribe. In other words, the ruling faction was actually Judah. Now, why do I say faction instead of tribe? Because Judah contains Benjamin and Levi. Why do I say faction for the northern kingdom of Ephraim? Because it contains all the other tribes, okay? So we have the Judite faction and the Ephraimite faction. So the Ephraimite faction is taken away, okay, leaving the southern kingdom of Jews, right, of Judah, okay? And so James, being a Jew, just like Paul says, I could consider myself accursed on behalf of the Israelite brethren who are lost, right? What's he talking about? The Jews who refused Christ? Nope. He's talking about the lost tribes. There is an affinity and there is a affection toward the lost tribes by the disciples. And I think it was because it was present in Yeshua, who said he did not come except for the lost tribes of Israel, right? The lost sheep. Okay. So before we get too deep into that, all I'm trying to say is that this diaspora that is being spoken of here is not the Jews scattered throughout the Roman Empire. It's the other tribes. And so he's writing this letter by faith that it's going to reach those ones who are bloodline Israel, who have been scattered into the nations, and we have no idea who they are. What a powerful thing, but that still excludes Gentiles. So I'm not going to get too much into this, but I want you to think about whether or not the book of James applies to you or not. Now, having said that, I want you to think now about some of the things that he is putting into context here. This is an instruction book for the lost people, the people who no longer had Torah, who no longer had the hope of Israel in them. Now, of course, prophets claim that, or not claim, but state that there is actually a longing or a pull by those tribes in the nations at the end of time that draws them towards the Middle East, and eventually they arrive back at the promised land and are, quote unquote, redeemed back into the whole house of Jacob. The whole house of Jacob being what? All the tribes, including Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, we do see some very interesting developments in Revelation. For example, we see the tribe of Dan is not sealed, right? Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to talk a minute about why did I say what I said about the anti-Semitic practice of not leaving the manuscripts in their original languages. And what is my proof? Well, in simplicity, there is nothing Greek about this letter. There's nothing Greek about James. There's no Greek idioms. There's no Greek nuances. This is a very Hebraic letter, like the book of Revelation, that has zero Greek nuances and zero Greek idiomatic usage, but is Hebrew. So, let me tell you what is taught in the seminary schools And what that pertains to is the way in which a Christian then would be taught by those who went to cemetery school, who now stand in the pulpit, is they're going to say, Jesus spoke Aramaic and Greek. I want you to understand that when Paul was arrested, he actually stood up in his arrest and said, I'm a Roman citizen, you can't treat me this way. Does that in Latin, but then he he speaks in Greek to the praetorian, and he says, let me address the crowd. He says, you speak Greek? Are you that rebel from Egypt? And he's like, I don't know who that is. Let me address the crowd. When he addresses the crowd, what language does he use? Hebrew. They didn't speak Greek, or he would have spoke Greek to them, or he would have spoke Aramaic, but he spoke Hebrew. Now, why is that so important? Because now we start to see that even though that there is a Gentile inclusion, the likelihood that a Gentile letter went out in Hebrew was low. And James appears to be more Hebraic than not. That's going to become important here in a minute. So first thing I want to do is I want to look at verse 3 real quick. Now, in that context, verse 3, be assured that the testing of your faith, what faith? The belief that you would eventually have the promise, right? He's addressing these children of Israel who have been dispersed abroad, these lost tribes, and saying, you've now awakened to the fact that you must be Israel. So I want you to understand that the testing of your faith through experience produces endurance, leading to spiritual maturity and inner peace. Now, I want to just address that for a minute. Your adversity will become your strength. You are an adaptive being, and your adversity will become your strength. Even if you're in an embittered state. You know, the other day I was talking to a combat veteran, and they were very stern, right? And very what's the word I'm thinking of? They were very indifferent to any spiritual discussions, and seemed to be not interested in any discussions about energies or anything like that. And I noticed that reaction, or that way of acting, was kind of this toughness that I think would have probably been necessary to endure, right, the hardships of war. And so in my mind, I said, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But I just really realized that their endurance, or their adversity became their strength, doesn't necessarily mean that they're operating in a positive realm of that strength, right? Because they had to harden themselves, right? But the premise is that then your strength will end up being your expertise. What does that mean? That somebody else will come along and you will say, oh, I've been through that. Let me explain how that works. Oh, wow. If your strength becomes your expertise, then guess what? Your expertise then becomes your ministry or your calling. Oh, yeah, that's true right there. Okay. So why is that so important? Because when we look at this, be assured that the testing of your faith through experience produces endurance, leading to spiritual maturity. But now watch this. When you are in purpose, when you are in your purpose, you will have shalom. You will be content within your purpose. Now, I can tell you there's some challenges and thresholds to that, but when the season comes, you will feel that moment of going, this is where I belong. Maybe for that season and not necessarily forever, but this is where I belong, okay? All right, verse 4. And let endurance have its perfect result, and do a thorough work, so that you may be perfect and completely developed in your faith, lacking in nothing. Well, that sounds like abundance, but we won't get too far into that. It sounds like abundance is completely linked to your endurance. Okay? But here's the big one, and this is the brain racker right here. And I'm going to go ahead and move this over to the New King James Version for a moment, because that's the version I memorized this in. And so I want it to be familiar to me. And here we go. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose he will receive anything from the Lord. Oh, wait, here we go. He is a double minded man, unstable in all his ways. Oh, man. That one right there. Verse 8. He is a double minded man, unstable in all his ways. Now we need to go over to chapter 4. And specifically, we need to look at verse 7. Therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you, right? That's korban. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, that's mikvah, and purify your hearts, right? That's the activation of Torah. And if you want me to prove that, I can prove that. You double-minded. Okay. You double-minded. Okay. I want you to think about what that is meaning there when it says you are double-minded. Okay? Let's go back up to verse 4. Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes him an enemy of God. And then it says, do you think that the scripture says in vain, the spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously, but I'm not going to even try to pronounce it. But he who gives more grace, therefore says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore submit to God and resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. So let's say that that paragraph probably doesn't belong there, and we need to keep context here. Okay, because we're talking about asking again. Look at this. You lust and do not have, you murder and covet and cannot obtain, you fight and war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss. What was that asking amiss? Doubt, right? That you may spend it on your pleasures. Oh, interesting. And then we'll add to that the fact that it's not for the right purpose, right? So what we're doing here is we're tying chapter 1 and chapter 4 together with the double-mindedness. But then we have something very interesting going on, which is that the double-mindedness has something to do with friendship with the world. And now we get to the meat of a very important question. How do we deal with this concept of world? Because I can tell you one of the mistakes we've made is we have begun to treat those who we don't believe are part of our faith tenant essential checkbox as not worthy of our time. And we also need to think a little bit about evangelism. Yeah, that's going to be important here in a minute too. So in light of that, I want to address this word world, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of mess around in the Blue Letter Bible here for a little bit. But basically, the word that we're looking for in this context for the word world is going to be cosmos. Cosmos, okay? Which consequently is cosmos, right? But it's coming from the root word komizo. And komizo is to care for, take care of, or provide for, okay? Then we go back and we've got an apt and harmonious arrangement or constitution or order or government. What an interesting thing. And then when we look in the actual Strong's definition, it says probably from the base of cosmizo or comizo, which is an orderly arrangement in the sense of caring about how it works out, right? And what's interesting is then we have this kind of this weird thing going on where cosmos is actually a substitute for tsava, right? Which is the arrangement of the stars. So the world or the universe or cosmon, right? In the Old Testament or in the Tanakh has its connection with that word right there, right? And there's a couple other Hebrew words here, but there's really not one that really embraces the context this way. Now, having said that, we need to look at something very important here, and that is that the word world may be translated in English and may have that cosmos as its word, but also Uranos is another word that is used for world. But what we're going to do, we're going to go to first usage of cosmos in the New Testament. And again, the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the cosmos and their glory, right? You are the light of the cosmos. A city that is not set on a hill cannot be hidden, right? Or I'm sorry, a city that is set on the hill cannot be hidden. Okay, and look at 13:35, Matthew 13:35. That it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things kept secret from the foundations of the cosmos, right? World. But in the Hebrew, it's going to be a very different word, isn't it? So let's go look at some of the context of these, because the one we need is about to follow this part right here. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and go to Matthew here. All right, here we go. All these things Jesus spoke to the multitudes in parables, and without a parable he did not speak to them, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things kept secret from the foundations of the world. And we're going to go to Psalm chapter 78, verse 2 to find that. So let's go there. Psalm chapter 78, verse 2. Psalm 78, verse 2. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old. And that is the word kedem, which is also the word for east. Oh, yeah. Now we're going to get into it. Okay. What if I told you that the wisdom of the east regresses as it travels west because of the politics of the Roman Empire that has been Hellenized? What if Greek philosophy actually caused a loss of philosophy and other information from the East as it moves west through the grapevine, loses its intensity and its knowledge basically through the telephone game? Because why? As we get closer to Rome And further away from the eastern reaches of the Roman Empire, we move into a logical and less mythological state. Okay? Don't get me wrong, the Roman Empire had its mythological state in the sense of its gods and its days. We know that because our weekdays are actually a combination of Norse influence and Roman influence. And truth be told, is that Roman influence actually is stronger and that Norse influence is a later addition. So in the early days, all of the information for the weekdays would have been contained within the gods of the Roman Empire: Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, etc. But as we have the Scandinavian influence upon the Anglo-Saxon origins of our current calendar, we have Norse god influence. So we have Thor's Day or Thursday. We have Frigga Day or Friday, right? We have Woden's Day or Wednesday. So in principle, the way that I want you to think about this is that as you move into the Roman Empire, you move into a different philosophy from the Eastern philosophies, and that information is lost. And there is a reason why the word ancient in Hebrew, kadem, happens to also be something to do with the East. Let me explain. Okay, so the first and foremost, there are two very important elements that need to be understood. And that is that when we're dealing with Hebrew thought, that which in front of you is the past. And that which is behind you is the future. Now, the reason why this is important is because you need to know that what's really being understood here is that which you have already faced is information we already know and is experience and therefore is the past. That which we have not faced is actually behind us and is scary, because what is behind the Israelite who's facing east but the sea? And remember, the sea is actually what? Chaos and turmoil and all of the other tumultuous things that are involved in the sea being something that swallows up people and has these horrible storms and floods the shores, right? So facing east towards the desert is a more natural state and a better understanding of how things are going to be. They traveled from the east to the west when they left Egypt. There's something very powerful about that metaphor in and of itself. In fact, in esoteric circles, there is actually discussion about that you travel from ignorance, or what we would call profane, into the non-profane, the non-common, or what we would potentially call the holy, and esoteric, or knowledge that is hidden because of ignorance. You go from ignorance to knowing. And then it is spoken in this manner, that I travel from the west to the east. So when we're facing east, we're facing the rising sun. And while we're facing the rising sun, we are facing antiquity, or the past, in Hebrew thought. Which means what? The word kadem here is the word cosmos in the Greek, or cosmos. Okay. In fact, I believe I can actually show you that by jumping into the word. Jumping into the verse and scrolling down, and we can then identify the word that is being used here. Let's see if it is actually cosmos. So I actually don't see cosmos here, but oh, there it is, RK. Okay, so they used RK here. But the premise is that is the verse that is being mentioned by Yeshua in the New Testament in Greek, right? So Yeshua quotes this verse, which consequently that word kedem is the word that's used there. But when we go back into the when we go back to Matthew, it's the word world, and in the Greek, it is the word cosmon or cosmos. Okay? Cosmon is the genitive, which usually means that it has, so the genitive is usually a case for a noun or pronoun to show the description, which can potentially be possession. Okay. But in this case, what are we looking at here? The foundations of the world. So that would be the world possessing foundations. That's why it's in the genitive. But really, that word is cosmos. Okay? So now we understand that is an apt and harmonious arrangement or constitution or order government, right? And the third definition down gives us the word universe, but again, we have some problems with that, don't we? Okay. So now what we need to do is we need to keep, whoops, that died. We need to keep going, okay? And what we need to look at is this. And this is very, very important. Very, very important. In fact, let's go up and let's look at this. Yes, we are going to talk today about the wheat and the tares. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. The servant said to him, do you want us to go and gather them up? But he said, no, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at the end of time, at the end of the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So then he puts forth this other thing where it says a parable also he put forth to them, saying the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is greater than the herbs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. Then he gives the parable of the leaven. Another parable he spoke to them, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened. Okay. So what do these 3 have in common? Well, it's interesting. They're all linked together, but in their own ways. So we have the parable of the sower, right? And we know there's actually 2 parables of the sower, and we can get into that. But the premise is that as we get into this thought process, the context that we need to assign is he gives the parable of the sower, then the parable of the mustard seed, and then the parable of the leaven, which gives us 3 things. Number 1, it gives us a intention or an ideal behind the seeds. Then it gives an example of how small a seed is compared to its growth, and what the resultant is big and huge. But then he gives an example of how a little bit causes influence over a whole bunch. Okay? Now, having said that, let's move down into this part here. Then Yeshua sent the multitude away. and went into the house. And his disciples came to him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said to them, He who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. Okay, so let's stop there. Who thinks this is Jesus sowing the good seed? I'm sorry, but if Yahweh called Ezekiel the Son of Man, then let's just go with Ezekiel, because that's a very good example. And let's say that Ezekiel's the only one, even though that's not true. Let's say Ezekiel's the only one who was called the Son of Man. Then we already can exclude Yeshua as a singular process of sowing, which means at least two. So if Yeshua, as the quote unquote Son of Man, which is a Messiah type of reference, which I don't find that, but for some reason, Christianity has assigned that definition to him, that the Son of Man, right? And then next we have what? We have Ezekiel. So at least two people are now sowing this seed. But I propose to you that any son of Adam, which would be somebody who is made in Adam's image and likeness, according to what happened with Seth in chapter 5 of Genesis, when he says, Now I have begotten a child or a son in my image and my likeness. Contradictory to verse 26 and 27 of Genesis chapter 1 that says, Let us make man in our image and likeness. But in the end, this is son of Adam. And if anybody's a C.S. Lewis fan, you know that he referred to the people who came into Narnia as sons of Adam, right? Okay. So the premise, he who sows good seed is the son of Adam. The field is the world. So let's talk a minute about that for a second. If the field is the world, then we need to accept that the context of the world is not negative or positive in nature. Now, I'm going to contradict myself here in a minute and show you that that's not true, but then I'm going to propose to you that these are references to how the field has been affected, okay? So we have the field is the world, the good seeds are the sons of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. Now, what's interesting about this is when we see the word devil, we immediately want to assign all this responsibility and power and ability and focus to Lucifer, which consequently is the Latin pronunciation of the Hebrew word, not name, Hillel, mentioned in Isaiah, where it says, O Lucifer, how art thou fallen? Consequently, you need to know that that word Lucifer is brought over from the Latin Vulgate, not from the Hebrew scriptures. That's right. Lucifer is not in your Bible. Okay, and why is that important? Because when we see this next verse right here, the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Devil. Let's get into that word for a minute. Diabolos. Okay? Diabolos. Let's break it down. So dia, let's work on dia for a minute. Okay, let me do something here. Let's let's go here and here. So here's how Greek works a little bit. Let's do different colors here. So let's start with red will be upper or hyper, right? Height. Right? Which consequently in English is pronounced upper. And then this is hypo. Okay. This is N. Okay. This is ek. Okay. This is para. Okay. This is what is it? Into. Oh, I can't remember what into is. And then this is out of, and I can't remember what that is either. I want to say that might be ek. But anyways, and then this is kata. Okay. And this is dia. Now, the reason I drew this and showed you all these prepositions in Greek is so that you can kind of understand location. So kata is down from, okay? Para is next to. Ek is outside of. Oh, you know what? Ek is outward. That's right. Ek is exousia, outward. And then the one out here, the position out here is actually apo. Apo. Which consequently would be like apostasy. In fact, apostasis is being outside of that circle, right? Okay, and so in principle, the reason this is so important is because dia is doing what through the circle? It is going through it. So let's now contextually discuss that thought process. If there's a through process, then that means something is passing through a vessel as the vessel receives, and then the vessel transfers and continues to give. So in a normal dia version of it, something, you have something coming in and then being broadcast back out. Now, let's look at the word balo. Balo. So I got you straight on dia. Here's balo. To throw or let go of a thing without caring where it falls. Okay? So balo is an idea of throwing something without a target. Okay? Like casting a stone. All right? So now let's say that we're at the lake and we're gonna skip some rocks. That's balo. We're not really intending for it to hit a target per se, okay? Or to scatter, as in scattering seed. Another important piece of information when we use this word. Now, what's interesting about it is when we do diabalo, diabalo means to throw over or across or send over, right? And here's the crazy part about it. It's used one time in all of the New Testament. Diabalo is used in Luke 16:1. He says to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, and an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. Ho, 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 ho. If y'all knew what you just got yourself into. Accusation. So now let's go and let's take a look at this a little bit differently in the Thayers. So the Thayers is then coming across and saying that this is slander, right? Or defamation. Slander or defamation. Now let's talk a minute about this. In Judaism, there is something called Lashon Hara or Rekilus, okay? Those are the two words used in the Torah to describe the defamation of a human being. Now, there's two different versions of it. One is an inadvertent or potentially an omission of information that could cause a damage to livelihood, and the other is I'm phrasing that wrong. Not an omission, but an adding of information that could cause damage to livelihood, even if it's factual. That, I believe, is Rekilus. Now, I might have these two confused, but we're going to go ahead and proceed anyways. The second is Lashon Hara, which is actually where we have an evil tongue. That word hara is ha-ra, the word ra being evil, the twisted rope and the and the human head, right? The human head and the twisted rope, or what we call a twisted mind. Hara being the twisted mind, and then we add tongue to it, so it's the twisted tongue, right? Or it's the twisted mind's tongue, because lashon means tongue, okay? All right, so now the reason this is important is because now what we get into is this concept that you manufacture information that would cause defamation. So the two of those are very dangerous, but I want to propose to you that there is no requirement on the part of Lucifer to cause that to occur between two human beings and a third party. Because truth be told is that if you are telling somebody factual information that could defame them, right? You are speaking about a third party to somebody who knows that person and you know that person, and now you're making a defamation, right? That's issue number one. Issue number two is if you construct something and tell them, which can be included in the form of speculation, because I promise you, if you speculate with somebody who is biased, they will turn around and make it fact. You could be saying maybe it's this way, and they will turn around and actually broadcast it that way, which is lashon hara, rekhilus. And so, what's my point? My point is that, well, let's just put it this way. You can take this to the bank. You can pretty much assume that this is probably one of the truest things that you've ever heard before. Lucifer's on vacation because he no longer has to do any work. We've got it covered. All right, so having said that, let's now get our heads wrapped around diabolos in that sense. Diabolo is to just cast something out there without really having a target, right? So just broadcasting information, whether it be factual or not, that creates a defamation. Now, what's interesting is that we don't really see, per se, a contemporary use of diabolo or diabolos in contemporary Greek writings. We only see it used in this context. Why? Well, because in general, we can conclude that this defamation is based upon the idea of what we would call hasatan. And I'll get to that in a minute. But the premise is that when we say devil, we are being very inappropriate in our speech. That is not the word that we need to be understood here. It needs to be accuser or defamer or slanderer. Okay? Now, when we start to factor in that process, we need to accept that for all intents and purposes, the devil doesn't need any help. We are really good gossips. We are really good constructors of information, and we know just when to drop the fact to unseat a person's livelihood. Okay? It's done all the time. Look at candidates in politics. Some notable ones that I remember who were defamed sufficient enough to be pulled off of the candidacy were ones in which accusations were made about something they had done, or accusations were made about something that their family had done, right? Attacks on their character. And so then that's a good example is in politics, but another one is in business and corporations. There is a concept in corporations, or I should say, in the field of business and economy, that is directly related to Rekilus and Lashon Hara. What is it? Shorting. So it's not necessarily the bad part about shorting in the sense that you are actually predicting that it's going that a stock is going to go down and banking on that idea so that you can turn around and make a profit off it. But accusing the business of not being able to produce the goods or not being able to do the thing, and therefore those stock prices going down, that is Rekilus or Lashon Hara, and is it designed to cause the stock price to drop so that you can turn around and short it. That is darkness. And I can tell you, shorting itself is probably not inappropriate. Some people think it should be illegal, but the problem is that hedge funders will then find experts to defame the company they've shorted. So, does the devil need any help? I mean, if we accept that there is actually a entity bent on the destruction of humanity, guess what? He's on vacation. He's not involved with any of the operations of humans today. We got it covered. We are that wicked. We are that much of a problem. In fact, I only find one place in Scripture where we can identify that there is an enemy of God, and unfortunately it is us. For the flesh is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can it be, for it is enmity to God, an enemy of God. Oh, while we were yet enemies of God, Christ died for us. Romans chapter 5, verse something, I can't remember. But my point stands. My point stands. And what's my point? My point is that if there is actually an entity bent on our destruction, he doesn't need we don't need his help. We've got it covered. We're destroying ourselves. In fact, every generation, every single last generation, I have read information from biographies of people in the 1800s who believed they were in the last days. That's hundreds of years ago. Hundreds of years ago. They believed they were in the last days, and here we are. Oh, we're in the last days. Israel did this. There's an earthquake over here. This happened over here. There's rumors of wars. We're in the last days. They thought the same thing. And guess what they did? In the 1900s, they tried to destroy themselves with an apocalypse, with World War I. And consequently, that made a lot of people mad, and that turned into something really worse, which was World War II. And finally, after World War II, they're like, okay, it must not be the apocalypse. We're well into the 1950s now. Let's settle down. Okay, anyways, my point being is that every generation has believed that it is the end of time. And every generation then has done their thorough job of provoking an apocalypse of some sort. There is no greater, to this date, there is no greater genocide or apocalyptic style destruction of humanity than World War II. And I'm not going to get into whether or not that genocide is more important than this genocide and some inappropriate thing of taking people's land here or something like that, or annexation of a country. Stop. Understand what I'm saying. We created an apocalypse and we activated it. And that activation was a result of believing that it must be the end of the world because all of a sudden the rest of the world is in the dust bowl of famine. But here we are, almost 100 years later, a little more than 100 years later, we're still here. And what they were absolutely convinced was the apocalypse was not. And they had created this death machine as a result of it. So the devil doesn't need any help. However, if we were to accept that any slanderer, then we can take the word devil. So we say diabolos equals devil. So anywhere we see the word devil in scripture is diabolos, which is slanderer. And anytime you've ever slandered anybody, you are the devil. We can start to narrow this responsibility a little bit, but I'm going to take it a step further. Now, two very important things you need to know. You need to remember that a person who is a friend to the world is actually an enemy of God. And a person who is a friend to God is actually an enemy to the world. That's what James says. In fact, let's go back really quick and contextually look at that concept here in James chapter 4. And what we're specifically looking at here is the part right there. Adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Well, there's nothing in there about Lucifer, is there? No, that's us. That's us. And here's the crazy part. Or do you think that the scripture says in vain, the Spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously, but he who gives more grace, therefore he says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. There we go. Therefore submit to God, resist the devil. Oh, there we go. What is that? What is that? Ah, there it is. Right in your face. Resist the slanderer, right? Who's the slanderer? You, and he will flee from you. Oh, wow, that's interesting. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Now, please understand that you that I'm saying is also the you that is receiving the slandering. So what I really should say is, therefore, submit to God, resist the devil, you, and he will flee from you. Who will? The one slandering you. Okay? Let's make that clear. You are pretty good at slandering. I promise you are, because it's at the core of everything. I mean, even if we go back to the garden, there is slander. All right? There is Rekilus and there is Lashon Hara. But it goes a step further, doesn't it? Because this now has that if someone slanders you, you are supposed to what? Submit to God or humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, right? Now, in fact, I believe the actual, let's go to Young's literal translation. Be subject then to God. Stand up against the devil and he will flee from you. Okay. I think that's really good. Okay. Draw nigh to God and draw nigh to God and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you too sold. Ye too sold. Okay. Let's go back to the New King James for a moment. You double-minded. You double-minded. Okay. So what does that mean? So first we have seed, and that seed appears to have three very important elements to it. Number one, that it can be polarized towards a terror, which would be basically an inedible wheat, okay? And the second would be that it could actually be wheat. So contextually, we know that it depends on the seed. We know the sower of the tares is a slanderer. We know the sower of the good seed is the son of Adam, not Messiah, but the son of Adam. Remember, he says to Ezekiel, Son of man, can these dry bones live? Son of Adam. Okay? So now what's important is then we understand that a slanderer is the one who actually sows the tares for the field, and the Son of Man sows the good seed. How many understand that the sower is the same person? How many understand that when it says you are double-minded, that you are caught up in something that causes you to be two-souled? That's what it says. Let's go look at that, okay? So I put it back to the New King James Version so you could see that double-mindedness, because when we go back into James chapter 1, looking at verse 8, he is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways, right? And who? Let not that man suppose he will receive anything. Okay, we'll get to that. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. So we know doubt plays a role. And we know doubt played a role in the garden, right? And now what we need to do is jump back over into 4 and jump back down into that verse that says you double-minded, right? Right there. And specifically, we're going to go into the Young's literal. And now you can see that that says you, two-souled. Why does it say two-souled? Because in the Greek, it says deep sukos, from suke, which is breath, which consequently is the soul of a human. Let me prove it to you. Here is Strong's Concordance number G5590, suke, right, in the Old Testament. Okay, going down to Genesis 2:7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living being. Let's go there. And what is that Hebrew word right there? Nefesh. Soul. Adam became a living soul. And jumping back into that verse and going down into the Septuagint, we find the word suke. Coming full circle back to the word breath, but consequently from this concept here to breathe, blow, or cool by blowing, okay? But the premise is that this is the concept of soul. In fact, the word psychology, by the way, suke, pronounced in English, is psyche. The word psychology is actually the study of the soul. Okay, so the premise then, when we think about this, is going to come in the form of understanding this more like in terms of having two souls. Now, this can get very interesting and dangerous, but the way that you want you to think about it, it has to do with what you are sowing. Okay? So there are a few very important thoughts that we need to get into here. But the way I want you to understand this is that the seed was the link between the three. So we have the seed of yeast, we have the seed of the mustard tree, and we have the seed of the sower, the good sower, right? The good sower sows a seed, right? The guy who plants the seed of the mustard seed is actually going to have this huge expansion, right? Leavening affects all of the leaven, meaning what? The seed that is sown into the world affects the entire world. Okay, now that I have your attention, and now that it's gotten uncomfortable because I've basically made you the devil and said that you just affected the world with that slander that you've sown, I'm going to take it a step further, because that's just not enough. That's just not enough. Let's talk a minute about evangelism. because there is actually something that says that the harvesters are few. Pray that there would be more harvesters. And interestingly enough, evangelists interpret that verse to mean that they need to go reap souls by sharing Jesus Christ with them. But truth be told, when we go back into our parable, which is in Matthew chapter 13, and we listen to the next part, we see in, let's do King James Version, and I'll explain why in a minute. The enemy who sowed them is the devil, or slanderer. The harvest is the end of the age. We'll get to that in a minute. And the reapers are the angels. Okay. So let's look here at this word angel. It is the word angelos. Angelos. Okay. And our angelos would probably be the best way to pronounce it, but it's from angelo. So it's a combination of ago, right? Which is to lead, which consequently we could jump back over here to the board, and we could add ago as what? As something leading, right? As opposed to something following, which is another Hebrew preposition, okay? So we've got our word ago, which is to lead or take one with, and then we've got agele, which consequently is a herd or oxen or cattle, and so by default, we've got a context of angelos being somebody who leads, right? A concept of somebody leading, but in this case is a quote unquote messenger, envoy, one who is sent, an angel and a messenger of God. And here's the crazy part about this. There is no rhyme or reason in translation by the professional translators of when or how to interpret it as angels or as messengers, because of the problem of incorporating a belief that a human would not necessarily have an interaction with an angel. But we find that to be virtually impossible. So what do? We find Manoah, right, who is the father of Samson, out at his threshing floor, burning the chaff, right? He's burning the chaff, and what's happening? While he's burning the chaff, he is doing some sort of praying or some sort of meditation, and boom, this thing pops out of the fire, right? Pops out of the fire, and out of the middle of nowhere, a result is, he says, you're going to have a son, all this stuff, and he's going to be a Nazarite, and he's not going to have alcohol, and he's not going to touch dead bodies. And the result is going to be, he's going to be this judge to deliver Israel. Well, Manoah, in communication with him, does not show shock that he just popped out of the fire. So what do the translators do? They take the word angelos in the Septuagint, or they take the word malach in the Hebrew, and they translate it as angel. Why? Because some dude can't pop out of the fire. Well, that's somewhat true and somewhat not true, isn't it? Right? Because we know that men, sons of men, can walk through the fire, right? They can walk through the fire. How do we know? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? Azrael, Mishael, and Hananiel all went through the fire together with some other being, which we call the son of a god. There's a Son of God somewhere present in that fire. Okay, so having said that, then what we look at is a context or an idea that if we accept that it's angel here, then the next time we see a concept of a human interaction with this word angelos or this word malach, all of a sudden we're going to switch it over to something else because it's not as supernatural in character. Meaning what? Jacob encounters angels in Genesis. Let me show you this. So in Genesis chapter, I believe it's 37. No, I'm sorry. It is not 37. It is 31. And at the end of 31, he encounters, let's see. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. In Genesis 32:1. So Jacob went on his way, and angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And he called the name of the place Mahanaim. Mahanaim. Okay? Mahanaim, or double camp. Okay? And then it says this. In the next verse, this is crazy now. He says, then Jacob sent messengers before him. Now watch this. I'm going to flip this over to Hebrew. And I know that you guys don't necessarily know Hebrew, but you'll have the English side by side. I'm going to flip this over to the Hebrew. And in the Hebrew, it says that he met what? Malakei Elohim. Malakei Elohim. Okay? And then he says this is the what? This is the Machaneh Elohim right here. Machaneh Elohim, right? But then in the next verse, it says he sent Malakim to Esau. Now, I want you to understand the word messenger here is being translated so the word messenger here is the word, oh, it crashed on me. The word messengers here in this verse, there we go, is this being translated. Okay? That being translated. That is the same word used here. That is this. Understand? So what have they done? Jacob somehow encounters Malakim, and it's translated angels because he called it the camp of God or the camp of Elohim, right? But then in the next verse, he sends Malakim to Esau, and it's called messengers. Do you see our problem here? Do you see how quickly the translators just flip the script? Because they think because it's the camp of God that it is not humans. So that being the case, then we understand that when it says angelos in the New Testament, or angelos, consequently, let me show you that. Angelos in the Septuagint, there we go, right there. Angelos, angeloi, which is plural, right? We're jumping right back to the word angelos. Sorry, let me show you that. I didn't realize I didn't have the camera on. Okay, so here's our verse in the Hebrew. Malachim, the angels, okay? That is verse 2, right? And then going, and that's Genesis 32, I'm sorry, not verse 2, verse 1, right? Where he encounters angels. Well, in the Greek, it's saying angelos, angeloi. Okay? Oh, look, we're back to our word again. And of course, we can very easily go down and see that that is the word being used in chapter 13, verse 39. Angelos. The reapers are the angels. So either A, we need to accept that these angels, which definitely we have a legitimacy of angels. For example, when Daniel is praying and Gabriel arrives and says, I was fighting with the prince of Persia and helping Michael, those are definitely not standard human being descriptions of things going on. So we accept that premise that an angel is an angel, and so therefore we accept that Jacob sent angels to Esau. We accept that angels are going to quote unquote reap this harvest. The harvest is the end of the age, which we can discuss in a minute, possibly, but not necessarily. And the premise is basically what happens is they first gather the tares. Now, for any of you rapturists who believe that the righteous will be gathered first, I want you to think about what this is saying. It says, therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend those who practice lawlessness. Okay, I'm going to leave that one alone for today, but don't think for a second it means that you are being a bad Christian. And I will cast them into the furnace of fire, and there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth, which consequently you need to know that the idiom for gnashing of teeth is actually slander. Basically, assigning guilt. Well, he did this. Well, they're the reason why I did that way. They're the reason why I was acting that way. Remember, I taught you a long time ago, when you first took interest in being the change that this world needs, before this ministry was more about looking for people who wanted to change the world than actually finding them and training them. And when you first came into this ministry and you first began to encounter these truths, one of the things that I told you is that everybody is waiting for everyone else to change the world because they're blaming everyone else for the problem. And that everybody says they'll change when the other person changes. And that everybody feels justified in their position as being the problem, even though they don't believe they're the problem, as a result of this dysfunction of believing that they have a right to be naughty because somebody was mean to them, right? That's the premise here. So this furnace of fire wouldn't necessarily be per se hell, right? But instead there would be weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, which is what? Guilt and blaming. Guilt and blaming. That's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Okay? All right. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who has ears to hear, let him hear. Why did he say that? And why did he pull the disciples aside to talk to them about it? Oh, well, let's see if we can nail down that idea. So first and foremost, it is important for you to know that Yeshua is talking about something they would understand. And that thing that they would understand comes from Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Well, that's interesting, because didn't James mention something about your experience in endurance becoming your strength and your shalom? And this is important, and this is relevant, your responsibility to this world, right? And if he didn't have the wisdom to do what? To do the thing, to walk in the purpose, then guess what? You can ask for it, but don't ask amiss, because that's double-mindedness. Don't ask for wisdom because you want to be superior to your fellow man. Ask for wisdom so that you can rule like a righteous king. What's righteousness? Oh, here we go. Equal distribution of what? Of the abundance of God's wealth. God's wealth? Oh, well, that would be interesting, because the only way in which God's wealth could be present here in this place is through some sort of transactional tender, right? Some sort of thing that you can trade with. Welcome to abundance. And so you understand your purpose is tied into your abundance and to your endurance. But the alternative is that you are actually the slanderer sowing bad seed and therefore affecting the whole lump. You see where I'm going with this? You see how this is going on? Now watch this. There's more here. There's more here. Okay, so the place that we need to go next is we're going to go to, and I'll navigate there first before I turn it on the screen. We're going to go to 1 John. And we are going to talk about darkness and light. Let's see. If we walk in the light as he is, 1 John chapter 1, verse 7. If we walk in the light in as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Yeshua, his son, cleanses us from all sin. Next, we go to, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Now, who here, before they started listening to me, or who started to observe these YouTubes, knew that righteousness was an equal distribution of wealth? And therefore, unrighteousness is what? Stinginess, scarcity. He says if we confess our sins, he'll forgive our stinginess and scarcity. So what are our sins? Our stinginess and scarcity. If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar. And his word, what is the word of God? Torah. Zip, zilch, nothing else but Torah, right? All right. Now, moving on to chapter 2. Oh, look at this. The test, right? Okay. So now by this we know that we know him if we keep his commandments. Oh, that's very intriguing. I wonder what John was talking about there. Was he talking about the commandments of Christ, as some claim? Was he talking about the commandments of God, which would be the Torah, 613 commandments, 1043 if you count the extra commandments that are mentioned in the New Testament? He who says, I know him and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. So now we've got this Torah thing going on, right? Oh, brethren, I write no new commandment to you, but an old commandment which you've had from the beginning. The commandment is the word which you heard from the beginning. Again, a new commandment I write to you, which this thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away. I'm going to get to that in a minute. The true light is already shining. He who says he is in the light and hates his brother is in darkness until now. We'll get back to that in a minute. He who loves his brother abides in light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. Interesting. But he who hates his brother is in darkness and walks in darkness and does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. Okay, so I said I'd get back to something, and I know there's a number of things I said I might get back to, but this one I'm going back to. And that is this. Hate, according to Yeshua, is equated to murder. But here's the intrigue. Rekilus, which is a Talmudic commentary on defamation, is slander. And the intrigue is that slander and hate go hand in hand. If you hate somebody, you'll slander them. Will you slander them necessarily in lies? No, but you could definitely defame them through factual things. Because guess what? One of the biggest things that happens between friends in life is secrets. And once those secrets are needed for ammunition, well, guess what? And this is especially true in divorces because the intimacy between a husband and a wife usually results in some true secrets, right? And now all of a sudden it's time for the divorce, and now I'm going to go tell Jane and John over here about what this person told me in secret, right? That's the premise. Okay. But he who hates his brother is in darkness and walks in darkness and does not know where he is going because darkness has blinded his eyes. I will keep going. I write to you, little brother, you little children, because your sins are forgiven you for his name's sake. I write to you, fathers, because you have known him who is from the beginning. I write to you, young men, because you have overcome the wicked one. I write to you, little children, because you have known the Father. I have written to you, fathers, because you have known him who is from the beginning. I have written to you, young men, because you are strong in the word strong in the word of God abides in you, written on your heart, right? And you have overcome the wicked one. Interesting. All right, now watch this. Do not love the world or the things in the world. Let's go see. Well, I'd say that's a confirmation. Okay, let's get back over there. All right. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Is not the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. And we know the will of God is Torah. All right, so now let's talk about what has been said here. All that is in the world is the lust of the flesh. Let's go look in the Greek at this information. Okay, so first we have the lust of the flesh. So let's look at this word lust for a minute. Desire, craving, or longing, right? It only appears 38 times in the New Testament and is directly linked over to the words in Hebrew which are ta'ava, auba, and chamud, right? And the way that I want you to think about this is that the lust that's being mentioned here is that insatiable desire. Now, I know it says desire for what is forbidden, but let's just talk about this for a minute. There is a concept in this day and age that just seems to have not been present before Snickers commercials. And that is the idea that when a person has not eaten, they get agitated. But really what they're actually experiencing is fear. They're experiencing panic, where they basically are expected to perform a duty and can't because they're exhausted and their body panics. And so that comes out as anger or angry, right? And of course, before Snickers commercials, we did not know what's going on, but Snickers did such a good job of telling us that we were hangry. Now we really, really believe it. But the premise is that it's actually the body panicking as your stomach begins to contract. Oh, a contraction. Interesting. Contractive energy. All of a sudden, there is an instantaneous panic from the body, and that panic is, wait a minute, we did not eat when we were supposed to. There's a schedule. I do my metabolism at a certain time of the day. We have our processing of waste at a certain time of the day, our sleep at a certain time of the day. Why haven't we not eaten? And I'm supposed to calculate these numbers about profit and loss, and I'm supposed to move these things out of storage, and I'm supposed to drive this long distance without eating. It's panic. And so that's how I want you to think about lust. Lust is a reaction to the void, and it's a fear. It's a fear that the void is not going to be filled. So now when we read in James chapter 1 that we are led away of our own lusts, it is this Hebrew, or it is this Greek word, epithymia. Crud, I forgot to show you epi, but that's okay. We will do that now. So epi is upon, okay? Upon. So let's go back to our board and add epi to the list. Epi, okay? In fact, epifosco has something to do with the light, but we won't get into that. Okay. So epi, upon, at, by, or before. No, it's upon. Okay. Epi is where it's actually connected to, not coming down towards or not above, but actually lying upon something. Okay. All right. So then we have thymos. And if you know anything about thymos, you know that thymos is actually the word used to describe what's going on in the upper room as hypothymos. I'm sorry, hyperthymos. Okay. So passion, angry, heat, anger, forthwith boiling up, soon subsiding again, glow or ardor, the wine of passion, the inflaming wine, right? That either drives the drinker mad or kills him with its strength. But in general, fierceness, wrath, indignation, etc. Coming from thyu, which is a sacrifice or to immolate, okay? In the sense of to rush, as in a hard blow, by implication to sacrifice, or by fire, right? Or the slaughter for any purpose to kill or slay. And so, generally speaking, it is passion. Now, cameras. Okay, so now, what do we know? Epithymos is lust. So when I said it's a panic, it's a panic. But what's interesting is that word thymos means to have an intensity about, right? So there's an intensity upon you. Understand? Okay. One last thing we need to look at when it comes to epithymos, and that is what is the Hebrew equivalent, and it is chamad from the Hebrew root word chet mim, which would mean heat, right? And then dalet, of course, would be a door, so it would be the door into the heat, right? Okay, and also this one here, which is Eva. But one of the things that I want to look at here is where they have used epithyma in the Septuagint. Okay, so let's go back to this. So we're working on that word lust. because I know that has been a very, very inappropriately translated word. In the sense of that lust just automatically equates to sex. That's what people think. Okay. And that's not what we need to be doing here. And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? Okay. So let's get this straight now. Okay. This is Laban talking to Jacob as he leaves Laban's house with all of his possessions and his daughters and children and wives and sorry, not daughters, sons and wives and livestock, etc. Okay, and now the premise is that he is longing to return to his father's house, or he is lusting for his father's house. Well, that really isn't the definition of lust in Christianity, is it? So now we have the lust of the flesh. Let's take a look at this. So we have the lust of the flesh. So let's think on what that would be. The lust of the flesh. So it's actually the word here, sarx, and literally just means the soft substance of the living body. From the Greek word sorrow, which means to sweep or be clean by sweeping. But the premise is that it is used in the sense of being stripped of skin or swept off of skin, and the body is exposed. So the muscles, the sinew, all that. So sarx is the soft tissue of the body in the sense of the meat of an animal or the meat of the body. Now, where do we really get this? This is kind of a proof of what I said about Hebrew, is we get this from the word basar, which actually has the context or the concept of there being meat for the body, right? In fact, I think somewhere in Torah, it says we do not have meat. And then it says, while the meat was yet between their teeth, the plague began. And that word meat is basar. And that Hebrew word basar, which consequently we probably just pull up right here. Yes, we can. That Hebrew word basar right there is first usage of basar is actually going to be Genesis 20:21, where it says, and the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Now, when we read in 25, the two will be, in 24, we read that the two will become one flesh. That's kind of what we're getting at there, is this idea of the bodies coming together. So what does that mean? That means that lust or passion of the flesh is going to be an intensity of something missing from the body. Okay? Now, the body has a number of ways to communicate that it's in trouble or that something is happening. One of them is definitely going to be a panic, which will result in some sort of stress, chemical release, and response, right? The second will be some sort of discomfort, cramps, but also an insatiable desire, right? Hunger is insatiable. When you're not fasting, because when you're fasting, you set your intention to fast, and there is a mental preparedness for that hunger pain. But when it's not, listen, I will tell you right now, I could be completely okay in all of the areas of my life, which is rare, but I could say all the stressors are contained within the trust of God, we'll call it, and have my hangry moment, and all of those things become overwhelming to me. And so The body does things to you. And so when we talk about the lust of the flesh, we're accepting that there's a panic or fear of scarcity within the body itself. But then we get into something interesting, because the next thing that we need to get into is the lust of the eyes, right? The lust of the eyes. And so let's get back into our verse. Lust of the eyes. So when we go into the lust of the eyes, of course, then we have the same thing, but this time we've got ophthalmos, I believe it is called, ophthalmos, ophthalmos. Okay, I was close, but it's the eye. There's no actual metaphorical element per se in the sense of the eye, except when we talk about energies that can see. So middle voice, prolonged form of the primary middle voice, optomai, right, which is used for certain tenses. But to look or behold. Now look at the word down here, so that we can get our heads wrapped around this better. Let's see if maybe it's here. And it actually, there it is. I knew I'd find it. So this is ra'ah, which means to see. Yeah, in fact, ra'ah, its first usage is actually going to be in a very important place. Its first usage is going to be in Genesis chapter 1, verse 4. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So what is the difference between the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes? Well, one is an absolute contextual, passionate fear that the void that you're experiencing is not going to be met, right? That there's not going to be an answer to the void. The lust of the eyes is actually a perception of the light that would give you a belief that you should be afraid of the void. Does that make sense? One is a static, true, actual fleshly need and the fear that it's not going to be fulfilled. The other is an actual perceived need and the fear that it's not going to be fulfilled. Okay, and then lastly, we need to look at the last part is what? The pride of life. So the pride of life is going to be our word right here, which is alezonea. Alezonea. Okay, ale is another preposition, but we're not going to mess with it. An empty pretender or a boaster. Now, it's used 2 times, okay, in the New Testament, in Romans 3. I'm sorry, in Romans 1:30 and in 2 Timothy 3, verse 2, right? Where it says they're lovers of themselves, boasters, right? Boasters. But let's see where it ends up here. Proud lions have trodden it. That's going to be in Job. But look at Proverbs 21. A proud and haughty man, a scoffer is his name, and he acts with pride. I want to talk a minute about pride, because there's a mistake made in Christianity where they attempt to feign humility because they were commanded to not have pride. But the truth be told is that true pride is actually fakeness. And it is basically not presenting yourself as authentic, but actually operating as the counterfeit. So let's illustrate this for just a moment. Let's get our heads wrapped around this for just a moment. Let's do it this way. So in ancient times, a thorn bush is pretty much what we would call a tumbleweed, right? Which is consequently basically kind of this thing that looks like this, that's got all these little stickers on it. I'm not doing a good job of making this thing look mean. It's looking kind of pretty at the moment. We should put some flowers on. There are some good thorns. Okay, so anyways, they would take these and they would stick them together and they would kind of link into each other. And now I'm going to kind of try to illustrate this. They would stick them together. Now you're gonna love my sheep, right? And they would have, sheep inside of their. He needs an ear. There we go, and a little tail. There we go. They have sheep inside of this thing, and then they would actually sleep in the doorway. And the premise was that if their sheep were inside of this bramble, even if a predator jumped over the even if a predator jumped over the bramble into the corral, they couldn't grab a sheep and jump back over. And so they would have the sheep and the destroyer, or the shepherd who now has zeal for his sheep, is going to destroy the predator in the corral, right? And snatch the lamb out of the predator's mouth. So the idea is that it would dissuade a predator from jumping in the first place. But what does it say? That the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but how does he enter? He enters by a different way than the door. Why? Because he is the door. That's why when Yeshua says, I am the door, what he's talking about is that the door to the hedge of protection is the destroyer who watches, or the Yeshua, right? The salvation. Okay, so now the way that I want you to think about this then is that a false shepherd will enter through a different door, but also they are not the shepherd. They're not authentic. And if they're not authentic, then what they'll do is they will find a way to try to get the sheep away from the corral and away from the door, right? Okay. So when we are talking about pride, you need to know that it is a fake or false image. Okay? Meaning what? It is another God. Now, the way that this is possible is through the concept of concealment, which basically says that there is no way for somebody who is in one world or in one realm to any way encroach upon the second realm, okay? And all of the energy of that realm is contained within that realm. And so when we have a person who has obtained that energy and believes that that energy is actually of their own creation, then we have a false god or other gods. Achrei Elohim is actually what it says in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. Okay, so now the reason why this is so important is because when we get into this concept here in Proverbs, we understand better that this is about acting. He acts with arrogant pride. Okay? But in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 5, indeed he became, because he transgresses by wine, he is a proud man. So understand, pride is not believing in your ability to have purpose and to be something amazing in this world. Let me tell you, I have a friend. Well, he's actually um, spiritually connected to me as well. But I have this friend, and one of the things that he tells me is that when he was um, worldly and on top of things, he was actually making a lot of money. But when he became a Christian, he actually lowered himself and stopped pursuing that lifestyle and became poor. In fact, he made some statement the other day, I think something about this was the poorest he had ever been. Now, what's important about this for you to know is that Christianity teaches by default that poverty is acceptable. But according to my Bible and according to Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 15 through 68, that's the result of being disobedient to Torah. So remedy by becoming obedient. But then we need to take it a step further and say that it appears as though there also is some sort of problem with intent. So if intent is wrong, then there will be no answer either. And so that means that abundance won't come to the double-minded or double-souled. And I can tell you, one of the things that makes you double-souled is your vibrational ability to affect the condition of a person's life by stating fact that people don't need to know, or by stating a lie to defame them. That is the sower of the tares, and that's what a tare is. A tare is a defamation. So where this becomes important is because the angels appear to be the ones that are going to deal with it, and the furnace appears to be something to crucify or to put into the crucible and to smelt the impurities away, right? And there will be blaming and there will be guilt. You see, the danger of linking our realities into hell and Lucifer absolves us of responsibility of being the ones who are doing the damage. And that was one of the biggest changes that ever occurred in my life, is when I realized everything that I was doing had nothing to do with the devil. It was me, and I was the problem. And there needed to be a change. And I realized that nobody else had interest in changing. And so it was okay to just kind of kick it with the non-changers. But then I realized that everything that I see in Scripture, in the Tanakh, in the Bible, is about changing this world. Your seed that you sow, whether it be through defamation and therefore a reduction or contraction in a person's life as a result of your mouth, or whether it be sowing into the abundance and righteousness. I mean, isn't it amazing that you could actually tell somebody who is lower in economic status than you, financially, spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally, that they're actually a king? I mean, it's like almost like the story of the prince and the pauper in a way, because you become what? You become humble before them by not you, but it says Do not be high-minded, but condescend to men of lower estate. Sorry, my original memorization of the Bible was New King James. But the premise is that basically you need to lower yourself. And now that makes sense, right? Because when we go back into First John, what do we find? We find him saying that all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of this world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it. But he who does the will of God abides forever. Well, unfortunately, we can probably let's just take a look at something here. Let's throw this over into Young's literal real quick and take a look at this. To the age, right? So this is technically going to be like life everlasting, but what's interesting about it is that this is going to go back to the idea of the word, abideth meno, remains forever. Yeah, and it should probably come to olam here in the Hebrew. Let's see if it does. Yep, there we go, right there. And olam does not mean forever, it means the hidden. So, how can I explain this? Okay. When the neshama, which is the breath of life, was breathed into the formed out of the dust of the ground Adam, he became a nefesh chayeh, right? He became a living soul. And that nefesh chayeh is actually a combination of the breath of life and the dust of the ground. A scary Hebrew word that I am probably the Hebrew word that I am the most afraid of is the word dust. If you want to know some really crazy stuff, go study out the word dust. In fact, don't. But the premise is then now what we need to accept then is that the nefesh chaye is a combination of the over Adamah, which is the dust of the ground, and the neshama, which is the breath of life from God. That breath of life from God, my question to you is it eternal or is it not? And does it have intelligence? Did the dust of the ground contain any intelligence, or did the breath of life contain the intelligence, and therefore your soul is made up of a dust of the ground, which is not what you think it is, and an intelligent energy from the intensification of all power in the universe. Therefore, the premise is you already have an eternal existence. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life, is not a good translation of the Greek and not a good doctrine, because you already have everlasting life. After you cease from this place, you will be somewhere else. That's everlasting life. It doesn't say what that life would be. It doesn't say how that works. We know there's reward and punishment on the other side when we read Revelation chapter 22. But guess what? That is not how we need to be translating aeon, sorry, ahion. Yeah, I don't know about that. Okay. Let's see, perpetually, right? Incessantly, perpetually, persisting, as it were. Okay. forever, an unbroken age, but none of it. I mean, look, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, none of it in the Bible actually indicates that there's this everlasting side to this current existence. Okay? And if we wanted to get technical, everlasting life would mean that anybody who actually does end up in that state that Christians call salvation should not die literally. So we can play all kinds of games here. We can play games about the metaphorical reality of death. But then all of a sudden we go into this literal idea of an eternal damnation by which you never die, but that you experience suffering for the rest of eternity. And that's okay. That is not how our God works, guys. Okay, so let's tie this together then. In 2 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 3, as all things to us, his divine power, the things pertaining unto life and piety, by the way, that word piety is probably not the best translation there, hath given through the acknowledgement of him who did call us through glory and worthiness, through which to us the most great and precious promises have been given, that through these ye may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world in desires. In the Greek, epithemia. And so what do we know? We know that this has now come full circle because why? Because it says that the divine nature and eternal power of God have been given to us, right? And therefore, we escape the world through lust. Okay, so I want you to think about what the implications are that you escape from corruption in the world in the desires. Okay? So let's think about this for a minute. What do we know first? We know that Yeshua said, take no thought for tomorrow what you will eat, what you will drink, and what you will wear. And in fact, it even says that the heathen do this thing, right? Then he explains that if you seek first the kingdom and its righteousness, all those things will be added to you. So then we start to look at the kingdom as something important. Then he turns around and says the kingdom is within you. And then he turns around and says that the kingdom is a series of sowing and leavening. And then he turns around and tells his disciples privately that the slanderer is the one who is actually creating the problem, and that slanderer happens to also have the potential to be the good sower, according to James, where double-mindedness is the issue. So what is double-mindedness? It's where you pretend to be righteous. What's righteousness? The equal distribution of wealth, and at the same time defame. Oh, it's going to get even better. Watch this. So now we've got this concept that the divine nature, and in fact, I'm going to read it in the Amplified real quick because I really feel like the Amplified brings forth the thought in its extremity. For by these he has bestowed on us his precious and magnificent promises of inexpressible value, so that by them you may escape from the immoral freedom that is in the world because of disreputable desire and become sharers of the divine nature. For this reason, applying your diligence to the divine promises, make every effort in exercising your faith to develop moral excellence, and in moral excellence, knowledge, insight, and understanding, and in your knowledge, self-control, and in your self-control, steadfastness, and your steadfastness, godliness, and your godliness, brotherly affection, and your brotherly affection, develop Christian love, that is, learn to unselfishly seek the best for others and do things for their benefit. And here's James saying, you're double-minded if you're asking for the wrong thing. You want abundance, then be prepared to distribute it. You want to be satisfied, then be prepared to not want to be satisfied at the expense of another person, of their rights, of their needs, right? Okay, now let's get big. Let's get big while we are small. Let's see how vast we really are and how dangerous this road of double-mindedness really is. Okay, so going to go down. We're going to go to Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. So the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went off to wage war on the rest of her children. That's not what it says in the Greek. Seed. Those who keep and obey the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus, holding firmly to it and bearing witness to him. Some manuscripts include this verse that others do not. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But here is the premise. Let's go to, what do I say, King James, down to verse 18. Nope, it's not there. Okay. NLT or NASB. Let's see if it's there. It's not. Okay. But anyways, so the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children, right? Actually, the word there is seed, who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Yeshua. Oh, see, all this time, you have thought that it said children there. But now you see a tie-in, and now watch this. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. Okay? And so let's talk about what the dragon is actually doing here. I heard a loud voice saying, now's the salvation. Remember, the destroyer watches, and the power. What's that? That's the dunamis, right? Let's just double check that. Dunamis. Right there, dunamis. Okay. The power and the kingdom, right? The kingdom of heaven is like unto, and the authority, that should be exousia. Let me see. The authority, exousia. Yep, there we go. Exousia, which we've talked about, right? And so what do we have? Let's just check this really quick. What do we got here? We've got dunamis. This is energy. This is the potential energy. This is the scalar energy that we've talked about before, that is trackable or is traceable or is evidenced by Hertzian energy or vibration. Okay? So when Yeshua feels it go out of him, this is dunamis, this is the stuff that went out of Yeshua when the woman with the issue of blood touched him. Then we have exousia, all power in heaven and in earth has been given to me, therefore go ye forth. That is the exousia, right? Ek, going out from exousia, and exousia is forgot that real quick here. We'll pull it up. So exousia is a combination of ek and mei, which is to exist, right? And so exousia is the authority or the going out of existence, right? Or the extension of information that gives us the instruction to exist. Okay? And then the kingdom itself is the corporate collective consciousness of the saints, as it were. But now watch this. Now the salvation and power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, he who accuses them before God day and night. Who's the accuser? The slanderer, right? This is that word. This is that word, accuser. Just let me show you this real quick on this part. Accuser is going to be the kata agara. Kata agara is an accuser, and let me show you this. It is used 7 times. It is the name given to the devil by the rabbis, but the premise is in the concept of a slanderer, right? Somebody who's accusing, and so understand it's kind of the connection to this. And in a minute, I'm going to make that connection for you. A connection to the slander of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brethren that has been thrown down. He who accuses them day and night, right? And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb, because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. For this reason, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and sea, because the devil, Diabolos, the slanderer, has come down to you, right? Rejoice, O heavens, right? And the way that I want you to think about this is those who are walking in the light. Those who are in the light are the heavens, as it were, and earth and sea would be those who are not walking in the light or in the world, as it were. And all this stuff that is in all this information that is going on here, you need to understand is directly linked into this idea of a slanderer. Now, if you haven't gotten yet the concept that you are the problem and the remedy is to be authentic and not have the pride of life, the lust of the flesh, or the lust of the eyes, to walk in the abundance of endurance and not sow seed of accusation, because one of the seeds of accusation that we unfortunately make, which is at the seat of pride, is when we say that God is not satisfying the thing. Right? God brought us out here into the wilderness to die. But we're in a different season now, aren't we? As for this Moses, we do not know where he went to. Let us therefore make a God who will lead us. Right? Okay, now let's talk a minute about this shape right here, because that is going to be important in the finality of this message. Okay? And I'm using red for a reason. We need to use something else for the other part. Okay. So what you need to realize is as there is a dialing back or a contraction of the intensification of all power in the universe, that contraction is a reduction in light. Okay? A reduction in light. Meaning what? We can say this green stuff is light. Okay? And then we can say that this non-green stuff is darkness. Remember the concept of the mustard seed? Remember the concept of the tree, right? Remember the concept of this single piece of leaven leavening the whole lump. So what you need to grasp is that you are this point right here. And all of this mess out here, which we will color with orange, I think, is darkness. The world is a neutral thing, a field. Now, let me label that real quick. Now, when we talk about a field, we need to identify something. And that is that when we think of a field, we look out over a plane of dirt that has the potential. And anybody who's a gardener and anybody who has big gardens knows that line out there, you intend to do something to that soil to make it work with the seed that you intend to plant, right? And so when we think about that, we think in a single dimension of flatness, okay? But the way that I want you to think about this is more in terms of an outward, in all directions communication to all other existing entities that are under your command. Okay? So, whereas when Yeshua tells the parable of the sower, he's talking in terms of the flat plane. You need to think about it a little bit different in that all of the things that you send out return to you. Okay? Now, where this becomes important is when you identify that we are dealing with a potential energy. So let's see if we can get this straight because I want to end soon. The concept here is that potential energy is basically neutralized energy. So remember when I said as we project energy outward, it is intercepted by the field, and then the field is affected, right? But the energy is neutralized as it passes to the other person, but the other person's perception of it then becomes its polarization. And when I'm talking about polarization of positive and negative, I'm not talking about electromagnetics here. I'm talking about spiritually polarized in the sense of good and evil, right? In the sense of positive energy and negative energy. Positive being comfortable and good and acceptable and enjoyable, and negative being dragging down, overwhelming, frustrating, stressful. Okay? And I'm going to propose that certain vibrations are introduced into things, and those vibrations can stay in those things, right? And I propose that when we have a storage of energy, that storage of energy then can be taken into distances or into time. And what I mean by that is that you could enter a place where there was a bunch of negative energy and it will still be present there long after that entity has gone away. Now, some of that obviously can be psychological triggers, but a lot of that has to do with the concept of potential energy. Now, let me make it clear. When we're talking about the field and we're talking about sowing, you can see that the seed, right, of the woman, what woman? Of the woman in the garden who was promised that her seed would be at enmity with the serpent's seed. And when we accept that we are led away of our own lust, and we accept that the serpent was a lust or a desire, then we accept that that serpent's seed has something to do with lust or desire. Now we will get the full picture. Information communicated through the voice and vibrations to another human being is either going to elevate or is going to deflate them. And that information leavens the whole lump. Now, some information is communicated through behavior, and that's another story. But what I want to get across to you is that any information that is communicated to a human being, whether it be through the 5% of voice or the 95% neurolinguistic, either way, that communication being communicated to that person either elevates or deflates them. And here's the part that's crazy is you do not know the ripple effect of those words outward. You do not know the things you say to a person, how they then affect everything else around them as they receive them, and can even influence that neutral energy going into them, which consequently then becomes a bad vibe. Now, it is very important for you to also understand that if energy is neutralized and there is negative energy stored in a building or in an object or in a vehicle or maybe even a person, then we need to accept that part of the problem there has to do with the idea that somebody didn't send it out, but stayed and resonated within themselves and projected it out, or it just kind of radiated out from them, as opposed to a projection, right? Or a projection of energy. When we become angry, what do we want? We want another person to validate our fears. And the truth is that the way that we do that is we try to get them to become angry as well. I don't know how many times that I have had a discussion that was some sort of thing that I was agitated about, and the other person was calm, and I figured out how to get them riled up. And then I had a fight on my hands. And the intention behind that, in its simplicity, was I want you to feel my pain. I want you to fear with me. I don't want you to be strong and have a mindset of abundance. I want you to think scarcity because I'm afraid. And I need you to be afraid with me because otherwise I'm not validated in being afraid, am I? And that's how that works. So here's the crazy part. Slander or the defamation of another human being is an attempt to unseat them from what you actually want. And here's the irony in that. If you slander a person in order to get what you want, like shorting a stock, right? These hedge funders who say, oh, no, that stock ain't going to do any good. And it goes down and all of a sudden they make millions. It's the same principle that you are applying in your life when it comes to slander, lashon hara, or rekilus, which is the difference between false information or speculative information and factual information, and how it can defame a person and have them lose their livelihood. Now, it is imperative for you to understand that in our day and age, we use this all the time. Social media is the function of this. Right? So the function of Satan technically is social media. Because what all social media is opinions about things. Hey, I liked this meme. Hey, I don't like this person. Hey, this person did this, and I want everybody to know it, right? And so, what is that? That is the parable of the sower, and that is the sower of the tares, the devil, the slanderer, the diabolos, right? Or the kata agoro, which is basically the concept of there being a sending out of that information. In the end, what it comes down to is what seed you're willing to sow. You know, you find in scripture something very interesting, and it's a very, very dangerous fact, and very, very dangerous for our type of society. And that is that if a mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses accuse a person, they can be put to death. Well, what I want you to think about is what it would take to accuse a person today of something if you don't have witnesses in terms of Torah and how Torah activates. I've seen some horrible things go on as a result of the fact that people believed that there needed to be 2 or 3 witnesses in order for accusation to go on. But those same people will jump on social media and say, hey, this person did this. I'm going to tell you right now, there is a sickness in Torah observance right now concerning victim shaming and misogyny that needs to go away. And if you're one of those people who knows of the situations I'm speaking of, then you know already that you have in some way experienced it. Either you're the accuser or you're the receiver of the slander. You know how damaging it can be. But see, I want you to understand that slander is just fear. Just fear that that person is going to do better than you. Just fear that that person is going to prosper more than you. You don't understand reciprocation. You don't understand like kind attracting like kind. It doesn't matter what that person says about you. It matters whether heaven agrees or not. And that's going to become very important in these upcoming weeks as we approach the climax of the golden calf season. Now, why is this diagram behind me so important? Because the truth be told, anything outside of you is darkness unless there's another one of you present near each other. If I have a person standing 20 feet away from me, the only thing in between us is darkness. We both are the light, no matter what. You need to understand, Yeshua told an unbelieving, stiff-necked, screwed up rabbinical people, right? They were messed up by the rabbis' hypocrisy, which consequently is not, that word doesn't mean what you think it means. But they literally were they were not on the right track with Torah. They believed they were supposed to be experts of Torah, and then they themselves were common people who weren't to be trusted with the interpretation of Torah. Although the rabbis feigned that they could stand up and speculate, right, through midrash, but truth be told, it was only the rabbis that really had the authority. And Yeshua comes and turns these tables up, and then he turns around and says, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, blah, 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 right? And then when he walks away, they go, that guy sounds like somebody with authority, exousia, not like one of our teachers. He comes to a people that are messed up in the head because of their leadership and because of the occupation of Rome and the poverty that they were forced into because of the Roman taxes. But the premise is still present in the thought process that you are the light of the world. So this guy's 20 feet away from me. Guess what? In between us is just darkness. If I had a guy on this side and a guy on this side, then in between them, I'm sorry, a guy on this side and a guy on this side, in between them is just darkness. But if we were near each other, there is light. And here's the crazy part about it. All the information, all of the past, remember Kadem, all of the past, all of the knowledge, all of everything that's already been experienced is written upon that light. And so as you come into contact with each other, you will encounter that field that can be sown into. But here's the crazy part about it. As it's sown into, it starts to alter its state in obedience to you and your positive or negative assertion of it. But now I'm going to take it a step further. And that is that basically, depending on how open, how humble, remember how vast yet how small you are, you will be sensitive to those wounds and damages and boundaries and falsities within the other, because they're all recorded upon that area of light that you interact with. Now, what's important about that is that if you're told to stand back 6 feet from each other, again, the only thing between you and that person is darkness. But once you come into contact, all the information is present on both sides. Nobody is an expert. Nobody is a greater or a lesser in this situation, just information coming together. Your openness and humbleness may show what that person has suffered, but that may be true of you too, which means you need to be open and willing to and be vulnerable enough to allow that person to discern that within you and offer the seed that what is not a terror. That's a very different way of thinking about your interactions with people. And remember, like kind attracts like kind. So if you are the light, then the light will be drawn to you. If you are the darkness, then the darkness will be drawn to you. And that can say a lot about how you see movement. But I propose to you also, there is a sentiment and understanding of leadership here. And that's the final thing I want to touch upon. When we began this journey, I told you I was training my replacements. But truth be told is a lot of you have begun to share the things that I have taught you, which means what? You have begun to replace me. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be new students come along. There are people just now coming onto the YouTube page and learning. However, you need to understand that those of you who have started to branch out or feel that you want to branch out, this is the season. And the reason that is true is because there's kind of a lull in that storm of contraction that we experienced in the wilderness season. And as a result of that, we were kind of experiencing a physical realm high and a spiritual realm humility. Well, that spiritual realm humility is that part where you are the sower, in the sense that you are lowering yourself in humility of the vastness that you are, accepting that even though you are this universe of power and authority and collective conscience, you are also very small in the bigger picture. And that is very important to basically understand not only your place in that sense or your location in all of that, but also in the sense of being able to get under people. So this dragon comes along and makes war with the seed of the woman, and needless to say, is an accuser, a diabolos, or a kata agoyo, I believe it is. And that then becomes the foundation for all this other mess. Now, you need to know also that there is a zodiac involvement in Revelation chapter 12. and you need to kind of identify that you. Short version is don't read Revelation literally, but also don't try to lock it into one specific interpretation. And so the and I was just going to pull up that word for you. It's actually kategoros, from the root word agora, which means an assembly or people, and kate is someone who brings down, right? Going back to our prepositions here real quick. Remember, kata is this one right here, down, kata. And so kata agora or kata and agora combined together, it means assembly, right? Assembly. So kata agoros means to accuse or basically to bring down the assembly. Sowing tares. And now there's another parable of the sower, and we can get into that at another time. But what you need to realize is the world is charged with this mess. The field has been altered by this filth. And we need to kind of level it out, neutralize those things. But it's going to require us to not respond with the systems that the world contains. And we have all these things going on in Christianity about worldliness and being of the world, right? And we say, well, back in the 20s or maybe 30s, 40s, it was about alcohol, right? And then we get into the 50s and it's about not being the family unit and not being a patriot and not being a busy bee, I'm sorry, not a busy bee, a worker bee, right? You start to get into the 70s and the 80s and it was about not being hip, right? You get into the 90s and the 2000s and it was about, not being a individual, not like keeping yourself withdrawn from being an individual. And then we get into the 2000s and the later 2000s, and now it's about not being a community, right? But the premise is within all of that, we need to understand that this double-mindedness is about lust, but not lust how you thought you understood it. And that double-mindedness will result in Lashon Hara as you observe those prospering above you who you have determined either A, don't deserve it, or B, are not in the path of your abundance. Now, as accusatory as this message is about who I'm claiming you are, you need to understand that I believe that when it says that darkness is passing away and lust is passing away, that we're getting better at this. Okay? And so I know you are doing the best you can right now. I just kind of wanted to illustrate how you are actually growing into a good sower. But right now, you are not a good sower. There is something you need to remove from your lifestyle, and that is the fear of missing out. Okay? Now, when I say that, what I mean is that we're not supposed to think that way. Yeshua said, don't think that way. Okay? So, what is the most important key element to the things that I have said today? Well, in short, you are the light. We learned last week that there's nothing else besides us that is the light. And the reason for that is so that we, as the bride, would choose to receive, right? And we would not choose the darkness, which is influential upon everything around you except you, okay? Furthermore, I want you to understand that you are dealing with damaged soil. You're dealing with a field of energy that has been polarized to the negative because a single lump of leaven leavens the whole lump and has grown into a mustard seed from this little tiny spark of Lashon Hara. And I propose to you that in the context of everything, the way you activate your vibrations out into the universe is what the universe is going to be. Out of the abundance of the heart, words come. But if you go back and actually read what Yeshua said there, it says that murder and envy and strife and adultery and evil desires come from the heart. But out of the abundance of the heart, words come, which means eventually your words will reveal what your heart has. And if you are being slanderous or you are activating lust through words, then and remember, lust is not sex. Lust is insatiable desire or a fear of missing out. And so is slander. Slander is an attempt to defame somebody who's doing better than you, who's prospering more than you. And so in a weird sort of way, as long as you quote unquote keep your mouth closed and humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and let him raise you up, and humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and resist the slanderer, who's who? You. Remember the devil, I'm telling you right now, he's sitting on the beach in a lounge chair with a Corona. He has no interest in humanity right now because we've got it covered. Okay? So if there is a devil, that's where he's at. He's in the Caribbean somewhere, all right? On a Royal Princess cruise or something. Because his job is kind of taken. It seems as though somebody outsourced to us. All right.